let's get started. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for our first season preview webinar with Mississippi Market, Mark Seeley, and David Van Eeckhout. My name is Nikki Warner. I'm the Communications Director at the Good Acre. We're a nonprofit food hub located in Falcon Heights, right near the U St. Paul campus and just a few blocks from the new Bell Museum. Food Hub is a business that facilitates aggregation, storage, processing, distribution, and marketing of local food or locally produced food items. And that's a big part of what we do at the Good Acre. But as a nonprofit, we go further to help support local farmers with technical assistance, growing new market opportunities for local farmers through our wholesale program, and also building the capacity of existing markets to use more local produce, as is the case with a lot of the farm to school work that we do, which you can learn more about on our website, thegoodacre.org. And in addition to our programs, we really do our best to try to foster community around good food. So we have a farm share program, which many of you attendees might be members of. It's similar to a CSA. We also, up until recently, had some really fun cooking classes, which we ran with the support of Mississippi Market, because every great recipe starts with a stocked pantry. So Katie Marty, the Community and Event Coordinator with Mississippi Market, my co-host for this evening, she's joining us and would just like to say a few words as well before we get started.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nikki. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight on this panel. We're excited to be here with you, at least, even if not physically here online. My name is Katie Marty. I am the Community and Event Coordinator at Mississippi Market Food Co-op. For those of you who have not been in the food co-op, we are a community-owned grocery store here in St. Paul. We are focused on selling fresh, local, organic, and sustainably sourced food. And as a co-op, we are community or member owned. So we really exist to serve the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. And when we're thinking about profit, it's really profit to be able to return back to our members and keep dollars local. So at the co-op, every dollar you come in and spend is $1.60 generated in our local food economy. And I was fascinated by that stat and really thinking about the multiplier effect of how the co-op can then turn around and use that dollar to purchase from local farmers, to create local jobs, and donate to local nonprofits like the Good Acre. So our 3 St. Paul locations, again, if you haven't come in, are at Selby and Dale, West 7th and 35E, and then our newest store is off East 7th Street, right next to Metro State. We are closely aligned with the Good Acre and its mission. We really prioritize purchasing local whenever possible, and we do work with some of the same local farmers and makers. We work to help farmers find a market, being able to guarantee purchases then throughout the year. Year-round, we're at about 40% local purchases right now, and the numbers are closer to 90% in meat and about 70% in our produce department. I especially find that one as pretty high considering we're in Minnesota. So when we're looking at year-round purchases, it's not too bad. We're excited to be coming upon the growing season now, though, and actually really reinvigorating that local produce department. So I just wanted to share just a few updates too on what the co-op's doing right now during COVID. I know many of you are probably looking still at where to get your groceries and do so in a healthy and safe manner. So as an essential business, the co-op is open and providing healthy food and wellness products to our community. Some of our modifications we've made to protect staff and shoppers are reserving the first hour of each day for senior shoppers and those with compromised immune systems. We also have a cart sanitizing station when you come in the doors. There's social distancing markers. You see where your 6 feet marks are. There's plexiglass shields up at the register. And then just starting this week, all staff are required to wear masks. Shoppers are not at this time, but we really encourage you to. So if you're coming in our stores, please do that and help protect everyone who's in shopping that day or working. We also have 2 new programs I'm really excited about that can kind of better serve where we're at right now as a community. One is an online order and curbside pickup program that just launched this Monday. So that's at our East 7th store. That's the one over by Metro State. So you can go on our website, place your order up to 7 days in advance and pick your pickup time and swing by the store. Then our second one is our Co-op's Basics box. So it's a box of essential groceries for 2 people for at least 2 days, maybe 3 days. And that can really limit your time in the store too. You can, reserve those in advance and come quickly to grab a box or 2 for your week too. As Nikki mentioned at the beginning, that we do partner with the Good Acre on sponsoring the cooking class program the Good Acre has. The co-op also has a cooking class program. And we have transitioned our May, June, and July classes to all be online and available for free. So if you're interested, you can find the full calendar on our website, but it's topics like home composting 101, or maybe how to use your Instant Pot, and then a range of budget cooking or online yoga too. So you can check those out. And then I just have one last update before turning things back to Nikki and kicking off the panel. We started our annual plant sale this week. So today was the official first day. We're really excited about this. It's at our West 7th store, and then our East 7th store this year has some selection too. But the plant sale is a great way where, you can start your own garden, be able to support local through the local growers that actually, have our seeds and our starters. And you can minimize your trips into the store then if you're able to grow your own throughout the summer. So the plant sale is open daily through May 25th. So you can check that out anytime. But with that, I think I'll turn things back over to Nikki to get started. If you have any questions for the co-op, either on shopping right now, local purchases, or anything else, you can pop those in the chat box and I will reply to you directly. Thanks so much, and looking forward to the panel tonight.
Right. Well, thanks so much, Katie. And, like she mentioned, we initially hoped that this event would be an in-person gathering in our classroom. But in light of the pandemic, we've had to find new ways to connect with local weather fans and food lovers such as yourselves. And, despite the times, the growing season is still underway. So without further ado, let's dive into the reason that we're all gathered here today, which is to get an inside look at the growing season from our expert panelists. First, tonight, you'll hear from Mark Seeley. He was a climatologist with the U for 40 years. Mark has been a go-to friend of the farmer with his in-depth reporting on climate trends. You may know him from his weekly segments on NPR's Morning Edition each Friday morning, and through his Minnesota Weather Talk blog posts, which Katie will actually share a link to his blog and the newsletter you can sign up for to get updates on new posts in the chat. Mark is also the author of the Minnesota Weather Almanac, which is definitely the most comprehensive document on Minnesota weather history out there. And after Mark, today you'll hear from David Van Eeckhout. He is the grower support specialist at the Good Acre, an organic farmer himself for nearly 20 years. David's got a wealth of knowledge about farming in the upper Midwest. He serves as a great resource for a lot of the farmers that we work with when it comes to technical assistance out in the field, business advice, adjusting farm operations in the midst of a changing climate. So we've shared with David and Mark some of the questions that you guys submitted before this evening's webinar. But if you have any new questions for our speakers, please feel free to share them in the Q&A, and we will address them in a discussion after our speakers present. So thanks again for tuning in. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Mark.
Okay, thanks, Nikki. It's a pleasure to be with everyone, and I hope everyone is abiding by the guidelines we have to follow as we try to keep ourselves as well as each other safe in this pandemic environment. I'll keep my remarks focused on the weather and climate matters, which has been my life for nearly half a century. Nikki, if I can start off that way with the first slide, that would be great.
There we go.
There we go. I'm gonna do three segments. A quick review of last year, because last year and the conditions we observed and measured last year has kind of set us up for the 2020 growing season. Then I want to talk about the current assessment of where we stand with respect to moisture to grow our crops. And then lastly, I want to conclude with some remarks about the core of the growing season, June through August, and what we might anticipate based on the outlook models that we use. So if we can go ahead then with the next slide, Nikki. The one precursor to my remarks is that an acknowledgement that we live in one of the most variable climates on Earth, certainly one of the most variable by reputation. We're not only known nationally as having a highly variable climate, but we're known internationally for that, and our resilience as a culture for adapting to it. That's illustrated, for example, by looking at what's happened on today's date, May 6th. We were 98 degrees down in southeastern Minnesota on today's date in 1934. Conversely, in 1944, the morning of May 6th brought just 12 degrees up in St. Louis County at Alborn, northeastern Minnesota. In 1938, we had 10 inches of snow going on up in Roseau, Minnesota, in the northern part of the state up near Lake of the Woods. And then a very memorable and historic event 55 years ago in the Twin Cities, when we had 6 tornadoes across the Twin Cities in the late afternoon and early evening of May 6th, doing quite a bit of destructive damage and killing 13 people. 4 of those tornadoes were EF4 tornadoes, by the way. They were very strong tornadoes. The worst episode the Twin Cities has ever seen. So given the date of May 6th, with the same sun angle and the same day length in play on our Minnesota landscape, as you can see, we've had a huge, huge variety of environmental conditions over the course of our history. Can I have the next slide? The first and foremost feature of last year's climate in Minnesota, whether you were a gardener or a farmer, was you went through the wettest year in history. This map shows a compilation from our National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration scientists. And you can see across the Great Lakes from the state of Michigan all the way across Wisconsin, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, that those areas of our country experienced their wettest year in history going back to 1895. We had, I might add, not so much because we had the intense, huge storms that produce 8, 9, 10 inches of rainfall, but we were just plain old consistently wet. We had a lot of wet days, a lot of days that brought rainfall or frozen precipitation last year. And the other thing that's a piece of evidence for that is all across the Great Lakes region, the USGS, which measures water flows in all our major rivers and streams, noted that the volume flow on all of our rivers and streams in the region during the year 2019 was above the 90th percentile volume discharge more days in 2019 than any other day in history. So we were discharging all that surplus water elsewhere on all our major watersheds. And they remained high right through this winter, in fact, coming into this spring season. They've all been quite high. That's why we had such a serious flood threat around the state earlier this year. Can I go to the next one, Nikki? Here's the ranking of Minnesota's 20 wettest years in history. Those of you that have been gardening and farming for the last couple of decades, I would ask you to look at that list and think to yourself, how many of these years have been during your lifetime? And my guess it's going to be a remarkably large number. So these are the 20 wettest in state history based on a compilation of all observations in the state and averaged for each individual year. I might further add that being a philanthropic state, a state and culture that is so noted for its volunteerism, that we, as we speak today, have over 1,500 volunteer rain gauge observers in the state of Minnesota that report all their data in to us every day. So can we go to the next one? There's some of the places, some of these might be communities that you've visited or communities where you have relatives. These were all just a sampling of all the record-setting places last year around the state, and it wasn't even close. A lot of these numbers for total precipitation in 2019, they represent a number that completely shatters the previous historic record for that community. It wasn't even close. So most of the records were not broken by a small margin, but by a large margin in 2019. Can I go to the next one, please? Also, because of that persistent and high level of precipitation in 2019, places where we do monitor and measure soil moisture, the soil water profile, as we call it, remained above average all growing season long. So this graphic that's from Lamberton down in southwestern Minnesota typically shows this pattern. The black line going through the graphic is the historic average of many decades of measurement of soil moisture during a growing season. And then the bars are the individual specific measurements that were made last growing season. And you can see that the total cumulative water content of the soil profile was above the historic average line for every date sampled last year. And it remains above normal as we enter the 2020 growing season. So the amount of moisture we have stored in the soil, which always is kind of a, shall we say, an asset or viewed as an asset by gardeners and farmers, is still above normal right as we stand today on May 6th going into the 2020 growing season. We carry that effect over from last year. Can I go to the next one? This is a more national look at calculated soil moisture earlier this month, and shows the eastern half of the U.S. has a large amount in surplus in the eastern half. Now, granted, we do have soils of varying water holding capacities, but these are indexed based on the varying water capacities of the soils, and they're all holding stored moisture that is well above a typical average for this time of year. So if you show the next slide, Nikki, this shows that the surplus, especially across the Great Lakes, is striking. So now this we should chalk up in our bank account as an asset to grow our crops this year, because in the soil we have a lot of surplus moisture left over from last year. And so deep-rooted crops, of course, will be able to tap this, given that we get into any kind of a period during the 2020 growing season where we might go 15 or 20 or 25 days without significant rainfall. A lot of these situations, the roots will be able to tap the deeper moisture and keep the plants healthy in a lot of situations. Can we go to the next one? As far as a quick snapshot of drought, we have no drought in the area according to the U.S. Drought Monitor. This is, well, you can see the west central thumb of Minnesota is a little abnormally dry. They had an especially dry month of April. Last month was one of their driest. We had some individual observers last month in western Minnesota report less than 1/3 of an inch of precipitation. And then if we go to the next slide, according to the model outlooks, though, going all the way out, if you'll notice the upper right of this model projection, going all the way out to the end of July of this growing season, they show no re-emergence or no emergence whatsoever across the Great Lakes region, including Minnesota, of drought So we're not expecting to see any, according to the Climate Prediction Center of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Now, can we go to the next one, please? Now, this one, I'm always torn a little bit about how to talk about this, because this image you're looking at, this mapped image, is a graphical depiction that is a composite of 9 different models, 9 different climate models. And it's a composite of the expected temperature anomaly for the heart of the growing season, June through August. The darker orange areas are all areas that are going to be markedly warmer than normal. And then the light orange areas, which include Minnesota, are areas that are expected to be warmer than normal, but not record-setting. I want to emphasize that. The composite of all 9 models suggests that as we go through the heart of the 2020 growing season, we will generally experience warmer than normal temperatures. Not to say that we will have extraordinary heat waves or anything like that. It's not trying to estimate extremes. It's just trying to show tendencies, and this is an ensemble composite. So it's no individual model, it's a composite of all 9 models. So this, by the way, runs a pattern, our historic pattern the last 20 years, the last 2 decades, has been that 75 to 80% of our growing seasons in Minnesota have produced warmer than normal temperatures. So if we can go to the next one, is a similar composite of 9 models of the expected precipitation anomaly. You can see again in the eastern half of the United States, the greener areas are areas that are expected to be wetter than normal for the heart of the growing season, June through August. The very light tinges of green across Minnesota suggest that on average we might have areas of Minnesota that are wetter than normal, maybe slightly wetter than normal, but nothing like the record-setting precipitation that we had in 2019. So those are kind of the general directions we're seeing tendencies for as we go into the 2020 growing season. I want to conclude, Nikki, if I can, by just making a few added remarks, since we have some gardeners and farmers out there that might be concerned about this. A lot of our crops, a lot of our seed is already in the ground, although maybe it hasn't emerged yet. And a few crops have emerged. They're in their early life cycle, and certainly in hoop houses, we've got plants that have emerged and are in their early stages of growth. And because of that, I wanted to make some remarks that in the 7-county metro area of the Twin Cities, we do have a probability for frost this Friday morning and Saturday morning, as well as next Monday and Tuesday morning. So from the standpoint of being on guard, if there are plants out there that need protection, you should be aware that those 4 mornings, Friday, Saturday, Monday, and Tuesday, may have chances for frost temperatures. Now, not a hard freeze. I want to emphasize, and that's not in any of the models. A 22, a 25, a 26, a 28 degree reading is not in any of the models. But we might see some areas go down to 32, 31. We might even see an occasional 29. And with the day length we have now, it may last for an hour or 2 early in the morning. And then once we get past next Tuesday, we're going to go into a completely different pattern. We're going to see for the balance of the month of May, we're going to see warmer temperatures. We're going to see more cloudiness and probably a generally wetter environment prevail. So that's our situation, both the immediate and then what I talked about earlier was the long term. So that's the nature of my expectation for the 2020 growing season.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Mark, for that. Next, we're going to pass it off to TGA's grower support specialist, David, who's got a few slides prepared as well. Go ahead, David. I'll kick it kick it off to you.
Okay, thanks, Nikki. Thank you, Dr. Seeley. Always good to hear what's going on, especially statistically as it compares to other things. So I'll talk a little bit more about what's happening right now and what's happened in April and May so far on farms. As Nikki said, I do work with a lot of the farms that grow produce in the Twin Cities area, and so unfortunately, usually I am visiting farms this time of year, but that is not happening yet. We'll hopefully get back to that before too long. But you could see here, a picture from one of the farms that they are practicing their mask wearing, and it's hard with farming to maintain social distance because you have to be working right next to each other, whether it's working in the greenhouse. Sometimes you can distance, but the piece of equipment you see behind those guys right there is a transplanter, and you can't get further apart on the transplanter than the width of the row. So you don't have a lot of choices there. So farmers are taking precautions. Want people to know that farms have been working really hard to figure out what's going to be necessary for food safety as it pertains to the COVID crisis. So many farmers are adapting their food safety plans to sanitize more frequently, to wear face masks, gloves, other things. Most farms already have a sophisticated food safety plan, so it's actually not a big leap for farms to just adapt to a little more stringent plan than they already had. And that's part of farming too. You're not a farmer unless you are able to adapt. Weather on farms is all about adaptation. If it rains for 2 weeks straight, you have to figure out how to maneuver, and that's always been part of farming. So this crisis we have going on right now is just another way that farmers are having to be resilient and move in a changing time. Thankfully, a lot of farms are adapting really well right now, and hopefully we have a good season. Nikki, you could go ahead a slide. So, one of the ways that farms have adapted is selling more products online. A lot of you have probably seen that, whether it's ordering online through one of the co-ops or whether it's going directly to a farmer's online portal so that you could order pickup at farmer's market or something like that. That's getting very popular with farms. Those of you who have ever taken part in a community supported agriculture program or CSA program, you probably know that CSAs were very popular for the last month as people understood that they weren't going to be able to maybe go to farmers market like they used to, and yet wanted to still get fresh local produce. So a lot of farms have increased their CSA shares that they have available, and a lot of them have sold out already. There are still a few available. So if that's something you're interested in, there's a couple resources you can check out. The Minnesota Grown website has a list of CSA farms, and then also Land Stewardship Project has a CSA directory that also has farms. Unfortunately, neither of them have a great way of understanding who is sold out and who is not sold out. So you may have to do a little calling and a little research to try and figure that out on your own. The reason farmers have been adapting is because they know that some of their potential sales are going to be uncertain this year. Farmers markets, some are pivoting to more of an online and drive-through type pickup system, and some may not have the resources to be able to do that. So those farms are having to figure out how they're going to sell some of that product. Certainly the farms that market to restaurants are concerned greatly about what their year is going to look like, since it's going to be difficult for restaurants. Even if restaurants all started up tomorrow, many of them may have already gone out of business in the meantime. So that's going to be a big challenge for farms that were selling heavily to restaurants. Institutional markets, farm to school, those things are kind of uncertain right now. Most of that type of marketing happens later in the year. So hopefully when we get into August, September, things have smoothed out a little bit, and that will be a better opportunity for farms. It has made it easier that this is all happening, at least for Minnesota farms in the spring, because most farms have their stuff sold. They have their crop plan, they're in the fields doing the work, and so it's really not that different of a year for most farms. The weather's been fairly good this year for farms getting things prepared. Soil temperatures have remained quite cold, so you may have noticed if you planted anything in your yard in the last couple of weeks that it's just kind of sitting there, and it's going to sit there until the soil temperatures get up closer to 60 degrees before it starts growing very much. But the dry conditions have helped people to get ready. As Mark said, we had a lot of moisture going into the fall. So if we would have had a wet spring, it would have been a very difficult spring for farms. But it hasn't proven that way for the last few weeks. So people have gotten busy. They've gotten a lot of work done. And so hopefully we're looking forward to a good season. It's nice to hear that the outlooks are saying a warmer than average main part of the growing season. So hopefully we can get an early start and things will really get going well. Okay, Nikki. We do have a lot of farms that grow transplants to sell. As Katie mentioned, they've got their transplant sale going at Mississippi Market right now. So because there are a lot of people interested in gardening this year, more so than normal, if any of you have tried to buy seeds at any of the seed companies, you probably have noticed this, that they ran out of a lot of things or are taking a very long time to get orders done. That's going to be true of transplants this year too. So if you're trying to plant a garden and you want to go to your garden center and get transplants, the sooner you do it, the better, even if that means you got to keep it inside for a little while before you put them out, because it's, as Mark said, it's going to get cold here. So you certainly don't want to put out these peppers and tomatoes that we've got pictured here right now. It would not be a good weekend for those guys. But yeah, get them while you can, because the demand's going to be high, just like it was for seeds. Okay, Nikki. We do have stuff that's starting to be ready, and as long as it's indoors right now. So these are a couple pictures from local farms from this week. People are having salad mix that's ready to go. People are having radishes. These are crops that would have been planted quite a while ago, and they're growing in a covered environment, typically an unheated greenhouse-like structure, which we call a high tunnel or a hoop house. These kinds of things are growing great right now because we have a lot of solar energy right now. It can heat up quickly in a high tunnel environment to grow things fast right now. So if you're lucky enough to see some of this stuff either at your farmer's market or on one of the farm's websites, be sure and take advantage of it. Okay, Nikki. And lastly, I just want to say it's not too late to plant a garden. You know, sometimes people think by the time we get to May, you should have done all that already. And really a year like this, you're better off waiting until the weather calms down a little bit. Sometimes the weather stabilizes by now, but this year it's being a little volatile, and with some cold coming up at the end of the week, there's still going to be plenty of time to get things in the garden, just about everything. The picture here is one farm planting potatoes last week. Asparagus is starting to come up. Basically, just about anything you would want to grow in the garden, you still have time to plant. I can't think of anything that you would have had to put in already that it's too late to do now. So there's plenty of growing season left. Go ahead and figure out what you need, and hopefully you can find it and get it in the ground before we get going. All right, that's all the comments I'm going to make, and happy to answer questions.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Mark, for your presentations. If anyone has questions that they want to ask in the chat or the Q&A, now is a great time.
Nikki, do you want to start with a couple of those questions that people emailed in when they registered?
Yeah, for sure. So let me just pull that stuff up today. So we had a question from, let's see, Steve in Arden Hills had a question about what extent has the pandemic and lockdown affected planting decisions by growers at this point in the year?
Well, I think Like I said, I think most farms kind of had things locked up already by the time this happened. So I don't think it probably changed decisions very much. If anything, it may have caused farmers to increase plantings a little bit because demand's been very high. And also maybe to focus a little more on staples rather than some of the, you know, Romanesco or artichokes or, you know, other fancy crops. I think people are, you know, kind of meat and potatoes shoppers right now, you know, so I think people are making sure they got plenty of carrots, potatoes, onions, things that everybody uses.
Mhm.
I might add further that I've heard from comments, because as you may know, many of our weather observers around the state are also farmers. And they were pleased with the decline in fuel prices as they were entering the planting season.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have another question from Mary. She wants to know if the color of soil, of healthy fertile soil, is dark. Like, should your healthy soil be black in color?
Well, for the most part, we've got a huge variety of soils. For the most part, that is a good sign in terms of the organic matter that is in the soil, but it's not always a true indicator, because sometimes soils can dry out with a crusty surface layer that looks way too light in color. Like maybe there's not much represented there in terms of nutrient content or whatever, but when you break through that crust, all of a sudden you'll see that the layers of soil are indeed much darker and probably have a decent organic content to them. So it's not an absolute indicator.
Yeah, and anything you can do to add more organic matter will probably, you know, bring that color a little darker. So if you have access to compost, you know, use it. Don't be worried it's going to burn anything, or use all you want. It's a good thing to use. The more of that you have, the darker your soil will probably end up. Although some, you know, our soils are made up of minerals, so some minerals are just going to be darker depending on what the composition of the soil is.
I'll go ahead with another question then. Robin from Como was wondering if it's true that wood chip mulch will protect her garden from drought or too much rain, heat, or other weather conditions. What do you guys recommend as far as wood chip mulch on home gardens?
I'm a big fan of wood chip mulch. We use it around our place quite a bit. It moderates the soil temperature in terms of both extremes, doesn't allow soils to get extraordinarily cold, doesn't allow them to get extraordinarily warm. I might add, as a memory, as an actual measurement, Nikki, I don't think many Minnesota people know this. Back in the drought year of 1988, our soil temperature network around the state showed soil temperatures without any cover on them, just bare soil temperatures went up as high as 160 degrees. That is not good for anything in that environment.
Wow.
But they also are, it's also very, very true that they help preserve the moisture that is in the soil. And that might be for certain times of the year, that might be a huge asset, especially if we get into situations where the precipitation holds off for 2 weeks or more, something like that. So there's lots of good advantages for using that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing I would say too is that if you're going to use wood chips, the best thing you can do is use just natural wood chips rather than something that's got dyes on it, you know, from the store that's like shredded bark. You probably don't want to put that around your food. And then you should always make sure you have adequate fertilizer or in your soil if you're going to use wood chips, because the mulch will occupy some of the nutrients that are, you know, in the soil there as it breaks down the mulch slowly. So if you put a bunch of mulch around something and find that it's not growing very well, you might want to see what you got there for fertilizer.
Well, you guys set off a few extra mulch questions. Steve wants to know if how warm your soil should be before you put mulch on it. Should you let it warm up more? There's also a question about what the best mulch is, just besides ground, wood chips. I know there's hay, there's a few other materials. Don't know if you guys have any other suggestions.
I'm not sure what Steve's opinion is on this, but we can both chime in. I think you can apply, first off, obviously all the frost is gone from the soil. Typically, if it's 55 or 60 degrees in the top 2 to 4 inches, then I think you can probably start adding mulch and more or less moderate that temperature a little bit with the additions of the mulch. What do you think of that idea, Steve, David? Sorry.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think I'd want to make sure that it was consistently, about 60 degrees, 4 inches down before I mulch, because you can really end up locking in, if the top obviously warms a lot faster than deeper in the soil. So if you have, if 6 or 8 inches down, it's still 48. If you mulch, you're going to lock in that cold. And that can really, especially for heat-loving plants, that can make them struggle.
Yeah, good point. Good point, David. Yeah.
All right. We had another question about what plants you'd recommend for new growers. Kelsey said that she has a new garden plot, but no outdoor growing experience. So what's a good first couple set of plants to start with?
What does she like to eat? That would be my first question.
That is a good question for a question.
I mean, obviously things like lettuce are very easy for everybody, So, I mean, you really can't, it doesn't have a lot of pests. It doesn't require a lot of fertility. It doesn't mind getting a little frost. Lettuces are a very easy thing to start with. Things like kale, very easy. It'll be there all year. You can pick off of it all year. You just got to it depends how much space you have too, obviously.
But eating what you grow is also key. So you got to want to eat it. Beets would be easy, but if you don't like them, don't plant them. You guys also, we got another question just about the best source for measuring your ground temperature, back to the mulch issue. How do you guys take temperature of your soil? Best way to do that?
Oh boy. Well, there's a variety of soil thermometers that are out there. I don't have a strong recommendation for any particular one. David already alluded to this. What's more important from the standpoint of the soil temperature profile is, for gardening purposes, is probably just check the top 4 to 6 inches. That's probably the environment that you really want to monitor from time to time. I don't really have probably any of the gardening suppliers, or even just Google online. You can probably find somewhere you can sample. All the continuous monitoring ones get rather expensive, so you don't want to go overboard and get into continuous monitoring, because you can end up spending a lot of money and probably saturating yourself with data.
Yeah, and if you got an instant read thermometer for your kitchen, you could even go out and try that. Stick it in the ground and see what you get. Some of them aren't calibrated for that low a temperature, but it's worth a try.
All right.
Oh,
thanks,
hey,
guys.
Maybe Mark, could you talk about like a website that would have a good soil temperature monitoring, so people could go on and like just get a general idea of what soil temperatures are in the state?
Yeah, if you go to climate.umn.edu, you will get to the Minnesota State Climatology Office, and right on the face page, you will see a category called agricultural weather information. If you click on that, somewhere down there, you'll find a joint effort between the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, the University of Minnesota Experiment Stations, and the Minnesota DNR that gives a network of soil temperature measurements that are current, real time, up to date, all around the state. It's in mapped form, and so you can look at individual sites and see what's been going on with respect to the soil temperature. So that's one avenue you could explore for keeping track of the real-time soil temperatures around the state.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. We got a question from Matt Frank. He has it's for both Mark and David. Do you guys foresee the increasing impacts of climate change and warmer weather altering the types of food that we are able to grow in Minnesota in the near future, or limiting the types of foods that we're currently able to grow?
I think it's going to be both, in my opinion, from studying it in the College of Agriculture for the last 40 years. I think there are going to be continued climate changes that will pose some limits on things we can grow, but I think there's also going to be some expanding opportunities that we might see. I think what's going to be more important, Nikki, that will translate into some real change in Minnesota agriculture is to become both sustainable and more resilient with respect to climate change. We're going to have to increase the variability in our agricultural production. We're going to have to change, instead of planting 7 to 8 million acres of corn and 7 to 8 million acres of soybeans every year in our arable land around the state, we're going to have to diversify that more. And I think climate change is actually going to mandate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I mean, and I think we're already seeing this in the vegetable world. We're definitely seeing, especially, I work with a lot of organic growers. We're seeing disease pressure due to the warmer, wetter summers, and particularly the warmer, wetter autumns that really has ramped up disease to a level on some crops that farmers are choosing not to grow them. Those of you who shop at the co-ops know that, it used to be that there was always tons of local broccoli in the co-ops in August, September, and maybe early October. And that's just not the case anymore, because that's a crop that's very sensitive to moisture and excessive moisture, and very sensitive to disease. And so it's crops like that where we're already seeing shifts where farmers are getting away from those crops because they've simply lost too much opportunity there and too much money growing them.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, that was a good question. We got another question from Camille. She is curious about fruit trees. Her apple tree has blossoms, and she's wondering if the upcoming frost will harm them.
Well, again, it's kind of dependent on where she's at, but I think in my remarks earlier, we're not going to have a hard freeze, Nikki, but on those 4 mornings, just to reiterate the real threats over the next week, are Friday morning, Saturday morning, Monday morning, and Tuesday morning. And if we do have frost, we're going to go down probably to 32, maybe between 29 and 32, and it may have a duration of 1 or 2 hours. Under those circumstances, given the marginal protection you can have from sprinkler irrigating or something like that, or putting out, I don't know whether her orchard has the kind of smudge pots you can put out, or I don't know what the mechanisms they have available to them, but there might be the possibility of using those given that the frost threat, if it does materialize, is not going to be too amplified, nor is it necessarily going to be too long in duration.
I'm pretty sure she's in Northeast Minneapolis.
Ah, okay. Well, in that case, it might barely, I don't even know if they're still under the influence really there of the metro heat island. So they may touch 32, but it's not going to be a real hard, no way is it going to be a hard freeze for them.
Cool. And we had another question from Mary in St. Paul. She's seen on the news about how farmers are tilling lettuce underground because there's no market for that. And she's just wondering, what's the truth to that? And is that impacting any farmers here in Minnesota right now?
Well, thankfully, as I said, this crisis, was not ill-timed for, Minnesota, Wisconsin farmers because produce farmers, because they don't have a lot ready right now, and what's ready there's a very high demand for. It is true that there's been some food waste issues like that for all kinds of crops that were destined to go into the institutional chain, whether it was a field of cabbage that had to go under because Kentucky Fried Chicken couldn't make any coleslaw, and things like that. So that certainly happened, but we're not experiencing any of that right now in the upper Midwest. Most farms have sold anything they had, and so that's been good. What's unknown is what's going to happen in August and September, when the harvest is really coming in.
Yeah, and that's a big part of what we're trying to do at the Good Acre is just help match farmers with the market for their produce and match farmers with consumers too. So, well, with that said, I think that wraps up our Q&A. Mark, David, unless you guys have any other last remarks you'd like to make, I think we can probably wrap it up. After we're done with the webinar, there'll be a recording that I'll share with everyone who registered and participated. I'll send that out tomorrow, and also just have a few extra resources that came up from the Q&A tonight.
Hey, Nikki.
The only thing excuse me, Katie, the only thing I wanted to add is a citizen perspective, not a scientist perspective. I hope that our enduring this pandemic and coming out of it, the world's never going to be the same. But one of the things I really hope comes out of it is that our society much, much more appreciates the food system, all that goes into the food system, all the people that work conscientiously in the food system to try to deliver us good food. I hope there's a much wider and significant appreciation for that.
Hear, hear.
I was just going to quick point out that there's 2 questions in the chat too from Gabriella that I don't know if you saw.
Oh, you want to go ahead and yeah.
It was, has the Good Acre considered selling plants to grow? And then also a question on reducing weeds in the garden.
Well, David, maybe you could speak to whether we're selling plants. I think we're helping with a few neighborhood plant sales that just needed a place to do pickup. But as the Good Acre is not, we're not a farm ourselves. We're, kind of a conduit between farmers and consumers. So we don't.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an odd year with the Friends plant sale and other very large plant sales being canceled because of COVID. So I think I don't think anyone at the Good Acre is that interested in taking that on as a new enterprise. I think we just had a weird year this year where so many things got canceled that some people have had to pick up the transplants that were being grown for other things and redistribute them somehow. So, yeah. And as far as reducing weeds in the garden, we've been talking about mulch a little bit. I mean, mulch is a great way to do it. Getting out there, getting the kids out there to weed, that's always good. That's what we do.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, if that's what those are the most burning questions we've got out there. So I just want to thank our panelists, Mark, David. I appreciate you taking an hour of your evening to talk with us just about climate, weather, and what to expect this growing season. Katie, if you have any other last words to say.
I think that's it. Just thank you. And to echo what David had said, I think our plant sale will sell out early this year. So if you are itching to get your gardens planted, I'd say to get those stocked up in the next week or 2.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, guys. Like I said, I'll send an email with a recording to everybody and just a roundup of resources that we discussed this evening. And, you know, we hope that you guys stay healthy and be well. And, you know, we'll hope to do another webinar soon. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nikki.
All right. Bye, guys.